So now we'll take a few questions. I believe there is one question here from Sagahout. Alan, do you think that, like blockchain, we need to also focus on developing hardware, example servers, storage devices, portable devices, etc., which can cope up with a DLT, Hyperledger, and other upcoming tools for a smoother transition?
That's a very good question. I think the answer is I'm no expert. I'm not a hardware person. I have no doubt that the implications of distributed ledger technologies for hardware are there and that they're important. I have no doubt that there will be hardware support given to these sorts of technologies in such a way to make them more efficient, actually to make them more sustainable, for very good reasons. They're intensely carbon intensive at the moment. I think this will come. I mean, the one thing that I would point to is that in the future, we're going to have to make all of this kind of trust quantum proof. With quantum computing coming along, it raises the possibilities of unpacking all your cryptographic keys that you can think of, but it also raises the possibility of raising cryptography to yet another level. So those hardware dimensions, yes, they will come and they will be incredibly important. I think people who know what they're doing about these things have to do them, though. I'm not suggesting that we would be doing these.
Yes, I could add to that, saying, yeah, when the Satoshi Nakamoto paper came out, the system they proposed expects that we come up with new hardware in order to do the mining. It's actually something they say on the paper. People will develop more efficient ways to mine for Bitcoin, more sustainable ways to mine for Bitcoin. And therefore, this is one of the things that will drive the efficiency of the entire system. And we saw this. We saw people mining for Bitcoin on CPUs, on the old computer. They used to leave the old computer mining away. And then people start to use graphics cards. And then they started to develop specialized microchips like Ant chips. And it's developing all the time. And we're starting to see mobile phones capable to mine Bitcoin, for example. But there are some other technologies out there like IOTA, which is a self-mining consensus mechanism. So as the IoT device logs something into the blockchain, it also mines or it validates that transaction in the blockchain. And it's designed to be incredibly lightweight and consume very little energy. So it's a blockchain designed for low power.
So we have another question here, Abel, from anonymous attendee.
Yes.
How should the blockchain network governance operate for a construction project? Should governance be limited to key stakeholders only, or should network governance be fully decentralized to most participants through voting? Well, do you know what? I think that this is going to be one of those areas where a whole range of different structures will emerge. Different groups will try different approaches, and we will find out what the downsides and the upsides are of each of these structures. My own personal view is decentralization is incredibly powerful. Whether voting is the right way to work is another matter. Democracy is not necessarily the best mechanism, particularly if you like, the structure of firms or projects that are defined around a specific purpose. If you have a project which the job is to get the Tower of Babel built, there's a real challenge if you do it by voting on who places the next brick where. And I think to take a biblical parable, probably a bit too far. You actually needed a bit of top-down governance to get the job finished, and that fell apart when languages were invented. Of course, that was the origin of that fable, wasn't it? So I think that's my main answer to that. Are there governance bodies for monitoring actions of the miners? Oh, good question. Sagar asks, Abel, do you know the answer?
I don't think there is, and I think there is a real danger there, because, for example, we see that more and more miners or mining farms are in cold places like Russia and China. And of course, if all the mining farms are in one place, then they start to walk towards that centralized formulation. And you want to avoid that. You want them to be distributed globally as much as possible, geographically distributed. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that these questions are focusing on governance around this. I think governance is a very important aspect of the structures that will emerge, but in a sense, we can take the helicopter view on that as well, because I think what we're seeing around the world is the whole systems of governance of our society open that to challenge. And so I think that's a really interesting sort of dimension that's happening in this transition. Do we have any white papers about how to establish mining farms or construction blockchain?
Unless you have like a few million to invest, I wouldn't recommend you to start a mining farm. About establishing a mining farm for the construction blockchain sector. So yeah, like let's step back a little bit. You know, there's the whole mining thing. It's something created for the Bitcoin blockchain. There are lots of other blockchains out there that you don't need. The consensus mechanism is different, so you don't need to go through this mining process. So you can have proof of work, but you can have other mechanisms as well. And you can still make some money with Bitcoin mining if you like, but the competition is fierce. It's like a street fight. It's every single millisecond counts a lot. So it's about speed. So not sure if it's the right time to go in there anymore. Same thing with ICOs, initial coin offerings. This was a 2018, 2019 thing. I don't think ICOs are the big deal anymore. I think now we step into the world of implementing the technologies, actually coming up with solutions, use the technology to come up with solutions.
So this is really interesting, because I think what you're saying here is that in the history of this, when you have any speculative bubble, early entrants can make money, and they make money out of later entrants. It's a pyramid scheme in general. And that is what speculative bubbles are like. But then what comes out at the end of that is something which is actually about genuine value creation. And when you come out at the end of the speculative bubble, you're into genuine value creation. And what really matters there is, what do you actually make? What is the product? What is the value that's created? And that's the phase that we've now moved into in this area, which is positive.
Right. There is Dennis, a question from Dennis Scott. He's a PhD at Bartlett CPM. How can we introduce decentralized autonomous organizations in industry primarily controlled by main contractors with centralized system infrastructure? Where does this start?
I suspect that, I tell you what I think about this is that, in fact, you have main contractors, that is true. However, they all work on projects which by and large are working with different project partners on every project. It may well be that the contractor is the main, if you like, manager of the information infrastructure that's required. It doesn't have to be. It would be quite logical for that to be the engineering consultant or the architectural consultant. They could be the main drivers of this. For clients with repeat business, with repeat buildings that they continually build, it may well be that the client ought to be the main owner of these data, or of the architectural design of the data structures, let's say. So I suspect that what will happen is actually something quite different. What we will see will be an emerging set of sort of cloud-based outsourced agencies that will do the work, whether they're firms or the next Google on the horizon, if you like, that will have an offer and an architecture that can be adapted to absolutely anybody's requirements. And I think that may be where it will happen. I doubt if it will be one of the construction contractors that will invent that and make it happen. I might be wrong. It could come from anywhere.
Yes. And one last question. I'm just seeing the time, and maybe we have time for one last question, if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
Martin, there's one from Martin Dawn. So do we see a role for reconsidering the value of cybernetics for stability and longevity? Example, viable system theory and practice, in contrast to first wave blockchain governance, voting, etc.
Yes, I think that's a really important part of what is going on. I mean, I'm not going to make any bets on what's going to work. But I think that's absolutely right. I've got one other question here. Anonymous attendee. Do you believe that most financial data, such as tendering contractors' expenses, should be fully transparent on the blockchain for a more fair industry? Absolutely critical question. I think the real interest here is, yes, these things should be fully transparent. However, there's a question about data ownership. And so one of the opportunities here is to allow people to own their data and to make it transparent to the others that they wish to. There is a risk always in full transparency. And the risk in full transparency is that it opens you up to other people doing things with your data that you didn't want them to do and gaining an edge. So there's a balance to be drawn here between that full transparency and between some degree of personal ownership. I think that's being worked out in the community as we see it at the moment. It's a very good question, but it's one that I think it'll need to go through a whole series of court actions actually to get judged on. It'll be the lawyers and the judges that will determine how this works, certainly in a common law system. Perhaps in Europe, where you have Roman law, there'll be a different approach. A constitutional approach to this, but at the moment, I think it's going to be the legal profession that really has to flesh out exactly how this will work.
Yes, yeah. But I think it's also important to note that it's not because it's in the blockchain that it's public, right? You can have private setups of a blockchain or a DLT. And you can have a hybrid where you exchange just some data to a public blockchain that can be seen by everyone. So what is called permissioned blockchain. So the data is absolutely everywhere in all the different nodes, but you give access to that data using different levels and filtering. But the opportunity is there. It's a little bit like the World Wide Web, I believe. We need it needs to be curated. Yeah.
So there's an important aspect in this. You talk about financial data. This actually all comes down to value. Vilfredo Pareto in about 1916 showed that actually it doesn't matter what the actual ordinal value is, what the actual canonical value is. What really matters is the ordinal. It matters whether or not somebody values something more or less than something else, than what its absolute number is. And I think there's something very powerful to be built into that. We've all heard of the Pareto principle, the 80-20 and so forth. This is a part of that argument, which is actually it only matters what is more or less valuable to me at the moment. And once you know that, that may be the maximum amount of transparency that's required rather than the absolute value that you put on something in numerical terms. Think about this in auction terms, yeah, and game theory.
Yes, yeah, interesting.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Time for a break.
Yes, Leo, how are we doing?
Yeah, we're doing very well. Yeah, let's take a break, and then I think the next session is quite a full session, lots of information coming your way. So let's start promptly at 11. That'd be great. Thank you very much, Alan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you.
See you again soon. Thanks.
Bye.